Howie Bentley here. Welcome to episode number 16 of Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Before I get into today's topic, I want to make a correction about something I said on the last episode when we were discussing the Elac of Atlantis tale, Dragon Moon. I mentioned that Henry Kuttner's other stories about Prince Raynor the Damned, there were two of those, and I said they were originally published in Weird Tales in 1939, but they were really published in Strange Stories in 1939. Now that that's out of the way, today Matthew Knight and I will be discussing the Nifft the Lean story, The Pearls of the Vampire Queen by Michael Shea. Check it out. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, Howie. I'm good. How are you?
Oh, doing awesome.
Good. Glad to hear it.
So today we are discussing a Nifft the Lean story by Michael Shea. The name of the story is The Pearls of the Vampire Queen. And you also written a song about this story that appears on your Eternal Winter Archaic Lore Enshrined album. So you introduced me to Nifft the Lean. I had not read Nifft the Lean until yesterday. And I'm going to go ahead and let you shoot the synopsis to everybody there, if you like.
Sure. Yeah, Nifft the Lean is like a kind of like a rogue thief ranger type kind of character. He's not really like a Conan Barbarian type. He's kind of like this trickster adventurer, if you will. But the stories, there's 4 stories in this particular book. I believe Shea went on and wrote a whole nother collection, which I've yet to read. His books are hard to come by. It's one of the reasons. But within the 4 tales that are in this book, he goes into some really strange settings. Before I get to the story, I will explain that his style is very unique. I think probably more unique than most sword and sorcery authors. It almost seems like a different genre of pulp style fantasy, but the weird elements are so prominent that I think it fits into the category. And of course, here and there we get some pretty good action going on. So in this story, Nifft the Lean and his comrade, his name is Barner, he's this brawny dude, they are hanging out in this swamp that's by the Sawtooth Marsh, I believe it's called, which is like in this area. I'm thinking in my head about like this map I've seen before, but it's in this area near this great pyramid. So they're hunting for these swamp pearls that are in the lake. They're very valuable, so they're wanting to get rich by doing this, but it's a difficult task because within the lake the pearls are held by these creatures, and he refers to them as polyps. They're basically like these tentacled aquatic monsters, basically. They have this weird strangling node, which it's named that because that's what people use it for. They use this node that comes off of the creature to strangle it, try and wrangle it and kill it and get snatch the pearls. But it's like really difficult work, and they're like struggling trying to get these pearls, and like hours go on, and they're both like risking their lives fighting these creatures in the swamp to get these pearls, and they're not doing very good. Now this swamp is also haunted by other creatures too. There's these creatures that are like these spidery, giant spider type kind of things that are referred to as lurks, and there's also these things called gulls, and they're like these humanoid, almost insect-like kind of goblin things that are also in the swamp, among other things. He talks about them fighting these salt beetles and all kinds. So this is like a a really wild, dangerous place to be. So they're hunting for the swamp pearls. And like I said, they're struggling. So they run into another explorer who's there, also kind of doing the same thing or whatever he's doing. And I think they save him. And he tells them about this vampire queen who she resides in this great pyramid that towers over the swamp. She rules the surrounding areas because she uses her sorcery to basically protect everyone from these swamp creatures and everything. And everybody in the surrounding areas are like, they like swear allegiance to her pretty much. Now, this other character whose name escapes me, he explains to him about this yearly ritual that takes place, and it is the initiation of the Year King. What happens is every year, Volvula, which is her name, the vampire queen.
How do you pronounce it?
I say Volvula. That's what it looks like to me. That's how I said it in the song.
Yeah, that looks right.
Yeah. So she immortalizes. She selects a man and immortalizes him by draining his blood in front of the entire city. And the deal with this magic ritual is that she has to ingest all of the blood in order to maintain her youth. She has this like eternal youth thing going on. So in order to maintain her youth, she does this Year King ritual. And I believe it also like is the source of her magic, is doing this every year. So this is about to take place. They're learning all this from this guy they run into. So they develop this idea, and you don't know right away what exactly he's thinking, but they come up with this crazy plan to basically get into the pyramid and steal a drop of this Year King's blood, so that the spell can't be finalized, and they can hold it as ransom for like 5,000 swamp pearls or something. It's a scheme to get rich. So they're thinking like, okay, well, how are we going to do that? So then they decide that they need some kind of distraction, some kind of device to distract like her henchman and steal his blood. So they come up with this idea to get kill. They need to utilize these creatures in the marsh. So he kills one of these lurk things, these giant spiders, which is this whole task and all this, and they liquefy the guts and they hollow it out so they just have this giant husk. Meanwhile, they have to deal with one of these gold creatures too, and there's this whole weird thing that has a pretty eerie vibe where they're talking to this thing. So all this goes on, and they're collecting the resources they need, and then they get into the pyramid finally, and a whole lot of the story takes place with this swamp thing happening where they're in there trying to devise what they're going to do, and the whole collecting the pearls thing, and then collecting the bait, or not the bait, but the device to distract the henchmen in the pyramid. So they get in there, and that's when kind of the real adventure begins. And there's this whole thing that where they string up this thing that they didn't have to like conceal it as something different. They finally string it up like a marionette on this tower, and they're scaling this like high area, and they're dangling it and use that to, like I said, distract and steal the blood. Now the blood is like, so I believe, so the ritual has like taken place, but this blood is like saved for this final ceremony. And it says in like a cake almost is how he describes it. So he's got this cake, he steals it. Then they go visit this swamp witch for more information for information regarding a way to get back, or not get back because it's not really revenge, but to get away and utilize this ransom. And then basically there's this, I won't give away the total ending since I just told a lot of the story, but goes into a rather epic ending, I'd say. It's quite different from the beginning. And yeah, that's pretty much, I'll leave it there so I'm not like really giving everything away. But, you know, you can tell from what I just said that it's a pretty different tale. You know, this isn't swashbuckling guys sword fighting and you know, the standard kind of run-of-the-mill sword and sorcery you come across. This is really different, inventive kind of weird fiction, I guess.
But it is sword and sorcery. The guys have swords. I don't think they used them very much, or maybe not at all. What they used were spears to kill other people and these monsters.
Yeah.
They mainly use spears in this story. Now, I don't know about the other stories. Like I say, first time I read Michael Shea was yesterday, and this one story, of course, it interested me enough that I plan on reading the whole book now. But also I wanted to ask you about, I started to say about sword and sorcery. So yeah, it definitely checks all checks all the boxes for a sword and sorcery tale. We have with the sword, the sorcery. I mean, it's like a medieval type setting as far as I can tell. I mean, they don't have technology; they have magic there. For one, of course, you have that in high fantasy, but you have, and you know, they have those type of weapons, and also they have a protagonist who is very morally ambiguous. I mean, he's a rascal. he's a thief. That's his main deal. He's a very articulate thief, and it's told in first person.
Right.
The story is. Now, are all the stories, let me hold this up here too. Are all the stories, and can you see that whole book on the screen?
Yeah, I can.
Are all the stories in this, are they all told in first person?
You know, I
don't remember.
I don't remember. And it's confusing because there's like these, it's told in between like these eulogies, like this friend of Nifft, his name's Shag Morgold. It's like his kind of testament of Nifft the Lean and all that. So there's a lot of that in between too. I believe it goes back and forth. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, this one is in first person.
Yeah, but it definitely has all the things there, the elements there for sword and sorcery. It's just considerably different from, say, Conan or Kane or even Michael Moorcock's characters. It's quite a bit different. This guy is more clever than anything. Nifft is, and also I wanted to ask you: were these previously published in any magazines, or were they all just written and collected in this? Was this the first publication here?
I believe it was. I could be wrong.
Well, it has a copyright 1982 in the book.
Right.
It doesn't mention any previous publications that these appeared in.
Like that. So yeah, I think this is the first edition of these. And I guess it makes sense because, you know, you think about the time, you think in the 80s, that's when these thicker fantasy books were gaining popularity, rather than, you know, a lot of the thinner pulp novella kind of deals.
It does say first printing on this book, December 1982. So that, I guess that meant the whole, all of the stories were published then.
He had a few other ones. I have one here. This is Quest for Symbolus. This book is a sequel to. He was really inspired by Jack Vance. I believe I read this thing. He used to do sort of like a blog-ish kind of thing on his website years ago when he was still alive. He died recently. And he mentioned something about he was in like a hotel room or something, and he came across Jack Vance's. It was either the Dying Earth or the Eyes of the Overworld or one of those, and he liked it. He liked it so much that like he reached out to Jack Vance and inquired about doing a sequel, writing a sequel to the Eyes of the Overworld, and that's what this book is, and it's like the authorized sequel. So it's another really cool adventure tale, and it's shorter than the Nifft stuff, but it is good. He also has some that I've not read because these books are hard to get a hold of. I mean, even looking on eBay, they go for quite a lot of money, and a lot of it hasn't been republished. There's one called in Indiana or something like that, and that's a real well-known one that people really give a lot of praise. Another one was like a sequel to H.P. Lovecraft's Colorado Space, and I believe it's called Colorado Time. He wrote that.
Right, I saw that.
So yeah, there's a lot that I've not explored of his, and I'd really like to. He also has, I believe it's called The Mines of the Behemoth, and I think it's a sequel to the Nifft. It's like additional tales. I've not had a chance to read that either, but I just was so taken with these because they're so different. It wasn't anything I'd really read like this. You can kind of compare it a little bit to maybe some Clark Ashton Smith or Fritz Leiber, but really it's totally unique. And yeah, that's what drew me to it. I decided to write the song about it because I had quite a few tales I was covering on the album that dealt with vampires. I wanted to do this like vampire trilogy, and I had thought about doing A Rendezvous in Averon, the Clark Ashton Smith story, because that's one of my favorite vampire stories. But I had already done 2 songs where I was doing Clark Ashton Smith poetry kind of stuff, and I thought, well, maybe I'll do something different. So the 2 other vampire themed songs that I wrote on there were one about Robert E. Howard's The Hills of the Dead, like we mentioned, Solomon Kane's story, and the other one is The Curse of Baron Singir, and that's based on an early Magic the Gathering story that I read when I was a teen, and I really liked it. And it has to do with this vampire aristocratic lord who also like dwells in a swamp. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. This is like another sword and sorcery vampire tale because there's not many of them. Then it has this swamp magic thing kind of connected to in the same way as that one a little bit. So that's why I decided to do this. Plus, I was at the time really into this. I really liked Nifft, and just that album was all about paying tribute to my favorite authors. So yeah, I wrote the song. It was the final one that I wrote on the album, and I kind of recorded it at the last minute and added it on there. And yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. Michael Shea's wife, Linda, I believe, she had contacted me and just inquired about the story. Like she saw that she saw that I wrote the song, and she kind of asked me like, is this about that story? And I confirmed it, and I told her how much I enjoyed it and everything, and I mailed her a copy of the CD. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So with now this story that we're talking about here, The Pearls of the Vampire Queen, is largely in an aquatic set. Well, the whole story basically is in an aquatic setting. But now the other tales in this Nifft collection, those aren't in that type of setting, are they?
No, there is some more water stuff going on. There's another story called The Fishing of the Demon Sea, but it's more of a seafaring kind of part, and the whole thing's not like that. So no, the other ones aren't. They're more. So it probably would be hard to really get this from just starting with Pearls of the Vampire Queen, but his world is like a dying Earth kind of setting, and that's one of the things that when I first picked this up, I thought, oh, okay, well, this reminds me of Clark Ashton Smith more than anything, because I was really into the Zothique tales, and they're also kind of in that sort of, even though this is, much different, but yes, it's kind of, so that's kind of like the world that he lives in. And it's, there's a lot of these weird waterways and things like that. So it's pretty unique in that also. It's not just like a normal medieval fantasy land. Some of the other ones, he goes into strange underworlds and whatnot. The first tale is a real good one and has a lot of dark weirdness. And then that one, I remember pretty well. I can recall the events. Some of the other ones I'd have to revisit. It's been a long time. Pearls of the Vampire Queen I've read a couple times because I was writing song lyrics and things like that based on it, so I wanted to really get into it.
Yeah, and the Pearls of the Vampire Queen is written in a rich prose style, but very, very different than Clark Ashton Smith. It's not in no way derivative of anything else that I've read. Now, I don't know, maybe it's more influenced by Jack Vance's style, but as far as I haven't read Jack Vance. But as far as I'm concerned, it's different than anything that I've read.
Yeah, I think the rich prose, but it differs from Smith and the like in that, whereas they would really focus on a lot of archaic words and things like that. Michael Shea almost seems more. I don't want to say modern because that sounds bad. Like it's not modern in the way that it takes you out of the mindset of being in ancient times or whatever, but or a different in otherworldly sense, I guess I should say. But it does kind of have this irony and this humor a little bit that it's not quite the same way that Smith or someone like that would use that. It's more, I don't know. It's he just has his own style. It's hard to really explain, but I think that's where it differs quite a bit. And he was obviously influenced by H.P. Lovecraft to have written that sequel to Color Out of Space, or maybe it's not a sequel, but it's connected to that in some way. I've not read that one. So, but yeah, Jack Vance was his big influence, from what I understand, for Nifft especially.
Now, there are more Nifft tales than those collected in this book here, right?
Right. Yeah, and I've not read them yet, and it's on my list. I'd really like to. I believe it's called. Okay, so the sequel to it, I believe, is called The Mines of the Behemoth. And then there's also a collection that has both books in it, I think. And anytime I've looked, like I said, they're kind of like out of print and pretty pricey. But it's on my list one of these days to get a hold of that and read the other ones because they're really cool.
That's good. Yeah. Well, it's good to know there's another series character out there that I can read that I haven't yet read the stories from. And now one of the things that was to Clark Ashton Smith's disadvantage, I believe, speaking of series characters, was he didn't really have any. He had a world that he set things in, or worlds that he set things in. But he, unlike Howard, who had a number of series characters, or even Lovecraft, who there weren't really characters because Lovecraft's stuff wasn't character driven. It was all about atmosphere and creating a weird atmosphere. And but he had this mythos that everybody expanded on. But Clark Ashton Smith, he had these worlds that he set things in, but he didn't have a recurring character. And I think that was to his disadvantage, because you hear people talk about Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, but the guys have to get really into sword and sorcery and weird tales before they discover Clark Ashton Smith. And I don't think even now, there are many metal bands. I mean, really, there aren't that many metal bands writing about anything other than Howard, Lovecraft, and Moorcock. And then, of course, Tolkien, which is a whole different thing. It's high fantasy, which is the other branch of heroic fantasy, opposite of sword and sorcery. But you don't hear of many people. And one of the problems is a lot of these bands are European who play this kind of music that we play, and they don't have access. I've interviewed a couple guys from Italy and talked to some friends overseas, and they just don't have access to these books printed in English or even Italian, for example. A lot of them weren't translated, or they're hard to get a hold of if they are. But I think it's more of an advantage to be into this kind of stuff if you're an American, because we have all this stuff, that we can get, and we have to dig for it. I mean, this was pretty expensive. I got on eBay. I got the gentleman who sold it to me to come down on the book, so I could afford it. But he was wanting, originally it was $60 for it.
Wow.
But yeah, and they're all high priced. But I mean, if you really dig and get into this stuff, we get into this stuff and dig for it, you can find it. But and there really aren't even that many Americans that I know of writing this stuff that you and I do. There's Jason Tarpey, and I really can't, from Eternal Champion, I can't think of really many American, that are this deep into it. They might write some stuff about Howard or Moorcock, and that's what they know. But because they know it from other bands, not because they went out and looked for it, because their bands were already doing that kind of stuff. But and then even when I was doing it, the only person, when I started doing it and writing this kind of stuff in '94, well, my first demo was in '93, but in '94, when I did the Calder Born demo, I had a song called M Fate's High King, and that was based on Conan. It was about Conan, not based on Conan. It was about Conan. And I thought at that time, well, I bet I'm the first guy that wrote a song about anything Robert E. Howard related. But Mark Shelton from Manila Road had written Queen of the Black Coast, I guess late 70s, early 80s. I know I repeat myself from some of these other episodes, but I will mention that Mark Shelton was the first one to do that. And even then, when I was doing it, nobody else was doing it. And then and Mark only wrote that one song, and people think, oh, those are those Howard songs that he did on like Open the Gates with The Hour of the Dragon and The Road of Kings. They have nothing to do with those Howard texts. Those lyrics to those songs have nothing to do with it. Queen of the Black Coast did. But then I started writing all this stuff, and I'm not saying that anybody, noticed me. I think it was more a matter, I don't think anybody was copying me. There might have been a few who were influenced by me, especially in the Mediterranean area. But as far as in the States, there weren't even that many people really into heavy metal at the time when I started doing this. I started at the worst possible time. But anyway, I'm rambling. So,
It's okay.
Any more thoughts about Nifft?
Well, I just I think that and what you were just mentioning about the us here in the States having more access to this kind of stuff. I think part of it is the fact that it's kind of rooted in our history because of the pulps. In the early part of the 1900s, we had these pulp magazines were such a big thing. So Smith and Lovecraft and Howard were huge part of that, in the weird tales category. So it's these reprints, I'm not sure. I have seen some European, I've seen like French and Italian C.L. Moore books and stuff like that, like on eBay or whatever, but you don't come across them very often. So that might be one of the big reasons why other people haven't been able to be as exposed to it, which is great it makes it great when these new anthologies come out, like when we did the ELAC review last week. It we were both reading that new Planet Stories edition. It's a new pressing. Anybody can really get that now. But some of these things like this, it makes it difficult. So yeah, I wish people would realize that there is, a demand for it, and people would like to. They probably would do good. I mean, you've got guys doing it like Dave from DMR, who's like awesome, putting out all kinds of obscure things constantly. But this would be one that if somebody were to, get a hold of the rights and put it out, it would be really good, because it's hard to come by for sure. And even we're talking about Clark Ashton Smith, those two, like they re-released them, I guess, with that Night Shaper. I guess those are the modern ones. I'm just so stuck on these old paperbacks, I forget about a lot of them. But
one thing, covers are better too. And I'll mention it. I keep holding this book up. But that's a Michael Whalen cover.
Yeah, it's badass.
Now, that one that you held up a minute ago there. Do you mind holding that up again? Is that Michael Whalen? Who did that cover?
Let me see here. Does it say? That was George Barr is the artist.
Yeah, it's still a sharp cover.
Yeah, it's real good.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the guys are there. Now, there are some writers who know this stuff. So I was talking to the guy about the guys in heavy metal bands. Like I say, they don't know much outside of Howard, Michael Moorcock, and Tolkien. But a lot of some of the writers who are trying to write Sword and Sorcery now, and there are quite a few of those, they do know this stuff. And it's probably mostly those guys watching these videos we do. But
Shea wrote a handful of horror tales also, and he's known amongst the horror community as well, especially his incorporation of the mythos and whatnot. So
did he write modern horror novels, or was it all short stories mostly?
Yeah, that particular book I mentioned, I believe it's called Inyana, The Quest for Undying, or something like that. I've not read it, but I've seen it. That's like a novel that's like a sci-fi-ish, horror-tinged kind of fantasy book, I think. But I've not read it. But that's a classic that people talk about pretty often. And Nifft, I think, is the main source of, his main sword and sorcery thing. Aside from, Quest for Symbolos is a weird tale. I mean, it's like an adventure, Dying Earth, Jack Vance tribute thing. So, that fits in the category too. But yeah, I've seen that there's been some re-releases of his short horror fiction. There's one that recently came out. I'm trying to remember the name. I can envision the cover. There's a recent collection of his horror stuff that's out there now.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to look into that, because I do read a lot of horror, and I prefer short stories. A horror novel, I used to read a lot of them, but I just don't read that many horror novels anymore. I'm currently reading Ramsey Campbell's The Lonely Lands. I'm about a little over 100 pages into that one. But for the most part, I'm definitely, I like something I can read in one sitting. So this has given me something new to look into, and I certainly appreciate you recommending this to me.
Sure. It just clicked in my head. I think it might be called The Autopsy, is the collection with his horror stuff that's recently out. There's something involving autopsy in the title.
And this is just straight horror.
I believe so. Yeah. Might have mythos elements. I've not read it for to really say, but just from my research, yeah, that's a recent one that's been. I've seen it on Amazon. It's readily available. You don't have to search through eBay to find it.
I gotcha. Well, do we have anything else we want to say about the Pearls of the Vampire Queen?
I don't think so. Just a fun, different tale. If you can get a hold of it, it's an excellent one to check out. I had written an article that is on the DMR Books blog about this. I would say if you're going to read the story, maybe read the article afterward to get to just see my thoughts about it. But I probably just like in this video, give away quite a bit of it in the article. But I did that with all of the stories that all of the sword and sorcery themed stories that I did songs about. I wrote little articles about that are on his blog, on the DMR blog. So that's another thing. Another thing I just thought about too is that for people that are into audiobooks, there's an audiobook version of this Nifft collection that's pretty decent. And I think you can get it like on Amazon. I think that he's such a brilliant writer, and especially reading in his prose and everything, I would recommend trying to get the book, because it's definitely a different experience. But if you absolutely can't, there is an audiobook version out there, which is cool, because there's a lot of sword and sorcery that's not available in audiobook. There's you can get like Conan and the Broken Sword and Fritz Leiber and a couple others, but there's a lot that aren't. So that's just one thing to note.
Good deal. And I'll put a link to the article in the description with the video when it goes up. All right. Well, this has been Matthew Knight and Howie Bentley for Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Catch us next week on the next episode.
Lines on the battlefield, moving for the kill. A man with no name, all against him fall. He will not die, still juggernaut.